Welcome. I'm Maria Elena Salinas. I'm a journalist, and I'm honored to be your moderator today for Farmworker Justice Convening, a program and policy initiatives during the Biden-Harris administration. Some of the highlights in today's presentations will include empowering farm workers in the COVID-19 era and advocating for progressive immigration reform. As a journalist throughout my career, first at Univision for 37 years and now as a contributor at CBS News, I have seen and reported on the struggles of farm workers, and I've seen it up close. I've told their stories, hoping someone will listen to their plight and take the necessary steps to help them work and live their lives with dignity and respect. And that's why I feel so particularly honored and blessed to be here today and see that our farm workers are not alone. As we begin our program, I know that many of you are joining us from different parts of the country, and we are grateful that you took the time from your hectic schedules to listen in and participate in this important and timely presentation and discussion. All of us here are united in the idea that farm workers and their families deserve a greater measure of justice. Today, you will hear from Farmworker Justice staff and community partners about their multifaceted approach to achieving the mission of empowering farm workers to improve their wages, working conditions, immigration status, occupational safety, access to healthcare, and access to the justice system. Isn't it ironic that the very people who help feed America are often going hungry themselves? Their jobs are among the lowest paying and the most dangerous in the nation. Many labor laws exclude agricultural employees from coverage. A majority of farm workers are undocumented immigrants, as we know. They're living in fear of arrest, deportation, and breakup of their families or potential breakup of their families. Wage theft is also a very common problem for them because many undocumented farm workers often cannot take the risk of reporting it for fear of losing their job and being deported. Climate change has added to the dangers of farm workers who have been laboring through high temperatures that sometimes exceed 100 degrees and wildfires. And in the era of COVID-19, farm workers have suffered disproportionately due to the nature of their essential work and the lack of access to testing, healthcare, and vaccines. And yet, with all these challenges, farm workers are fighting back, and Farmworker Justice is helping them to do it. This year, Farmworker Justice is celebrating 40 years of continuous service to farm workers and their organizations. This convening is an opportunity to inform you, Farmworker Justice stakeholders, supporters, partners, sister organizations, and community leaders from throughout the country about major issues that farm workers are facing and the recent and upcoming work of Farmworker Justice. It's also an opportunity for our audience to learn how we can all work together to help farm workers, the people that sacrifice and toil in the fields each day and every day to help feed America. Our speakers today will include Natalie Camacho Mendoza, an attorney in Boise, Idaho, who is the chair of the board of directors of Farmworker Justice, Congressman and Dr. Raul Ruiz, chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, Bruce Goldstein, president of Farmworker Justice, Alexis Gild, director of health policy and programs at Farmworker Justice, Iris Figueroa, director of economic and environmental justice at Farmworkers Justice, Emma Torres, executive director of Campesinos Sin Fronteras, Suget Lopez, executive director of Líderes Campesinas, and David Damian Figueroa, director of development at Farmworker Justice. Well, before we begin, I would like to inform the audience that there will be a Q&A session with the Farmworker Justice staff at the end of the event. You can also submit your questions throughout the event using the chat function at the bottom of your screen. You will see chat. You can introduce yourself, say who you are and who you would like to direct the question to. So now allow me to please introduce Natalie Camacho Mendoza, who is chair and board of directors for Farmworker Justice. Natalie Camacho is an attorney by trade and the owner of Camacho Mendoza Law in Boise, Idaho. Natalie started her legal career at Idaho Legal Aid Services as a paralegal and assisted in establishing their migrant law units. After law school, she returned to legal services and soon became the director of the migrant law units. Natalie has consistently been active with nonprofits and has served on many boards, task forces, and commissions at the local, state, and national level. Her work has been widely recognized, including with the 2015 Harriet Tubman Award, the Thurman Marshall Award, the Thurgood Marshall Award, and the 2010 Hispanic Hero Award, a true hero, a Shiro. She received an award for recognition for her commitment to equality from the NAACP and was named the 2008 Idaho Woman of the Year. Please join me in welcoming Natalie Camacho Mendoza, attorney at law. Natalie.
Thank you, Maria Elena. It is my pleasure to serve as the chair of the board of Farmworker Justice. Coming from a farmworker family, it is wonderful to be a part of an organization that does so much for farmworkers. I thank you all for joining us today to listen to our story. Farmworker Justice is a long-standing organization. Over the past 40 years, Farmworker Justice has established itself as one of the leading voices on farmworker issues. The expertise among our staff has been recognized over the years. Their expertise has been relied upon to create policies and laws to support and provide protection for farmworkers across this country. Farmworker Justice makes an impact through policy work, litigation, education, rulemaking, and advocacy. But our mission at Farmworker Justice is more than just advocacy work. It's also about farmworkers themselves. Our organization not only works on behalf of farmworkers, we work with farmworker-led organizations and farmworker communities. We give support and resources to farmworkers so they can continue to build their voices, to tell their stories, and to advocate for their needs. We are an organization built upon this team of a strong team made up of our committed staff, committed advisory board, and our board of directors. I hope after today you will join our allies and supporters as we continue to seek out equity, equality, justice, and fairness for farmworkers, the very people who work so hard to put food on all of our tables. Thank you for joining us today, and I hope that you will learn from our stories and that you will learn why it is so important for Farmworker Justice and all of us to think about the individuals who toil in the fields and who provide food. And as Maria Elena said, oftentimes can't even afford the food that they pick. So again, I hope that you all will be, you will receive some education today about our organization and that you can join us in our future efforts to work with this administration to bring about important reform and protections for farm workers. And I want to thank all of our staff and all of you once again for joining us today. And I hope that you will be able to ask all the questions of our staff, and we will be able to come together as a country and finally to support the efforts of farm workers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalie. Now I'd like to introduce a very special guest. We are honored to have with us Congressman and Dr. Raul Ruiz, Chairman of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus and a member of the House Committee on Energy and Commerce. He knows the plight of immigrants and farm workers from firsthand knowledge. Representative Ruiz was born in Zacatecas, Mexico, and grew up in the Coachella Valley in California. Both his parents were farm workers. Congressman Ruiz graduated magna cum laude from the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA, and then enrolled in Harvard University to pursue his lifelong dream of becoming a doctor. In addition to his medical degree, he earned a master's of public policy from the Kennedy School of Government and a master's of public health from the School of Public Health, becoming the first Latino to earn 3 graduate degrees from Harvard University. After continuing his work as an emergency room doctor, Dr. Ruiz was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 2012. He represents California's 36th district, which includes the entire Coachella Valley. One of his constituents is Farmworker Justice's Director of Development, David Damian Figueroa. Please welcome the chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, Congressman Raúl Ruiz. Doctor, bienvenido.
Gracias, Maria Elena. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And I want to thank Bruce, as well as everyone at Farmworker Justice for today's invitation. And thank you to all the staff and supporters of Farmworker Justice, not only who made this event possible, but for the incredible work that you do in advocating for farm workers. It is so great to be with all of you today. Farm workers have a piece of my heart. Literally, my DNA is made up of farm workers. My parents were farm workers, and I grew up in the city of Coachella, in the Coachella Valley, which is in my district that I represent right now. And the first place that we lived in as a kid was in a trailer park. And I remember my father working very hard through weekends sometimes. I remember my mother always instilling in us the importance of studying so that we can get jobs inside and not work 120-degree weather outside in the Coachella desert. And I remember the lessons learned from neighbors and friends who worked tirelessly day in and day out with tired backs and calloused hands in order to give their children and families opportunities they never received. And I took that work ethic with me, and I still have it as a son of a farm working family and a son of a farm working community in everything that I do. And in Congress, I represent this area that I just mentioned, the Coachella Valley. And as a doctor and public health expert, I foresaw the risks that farm workers were going to have with COVID-19. And I've seen them play out with real experiences and real numbers. Farm workers are one of the highest risk individuals and communities to get infected, to spread it to their family, to die from COVID-19, and not have the resources to combat COVID-19. We know that they are essential workers, oftentimes working in locations without the precautions provided for them to follow the precautions to combat the virus. We know that oftentimes they live in overcrowded homes, whether in a 2-bedroom apartment, a 2-bedroom rural farm worker housing or low-income housing with 3 generations. My grandmother lived with me for 20 years when I was growing up. And so we not only are they at high risk of spreading it to their family if they get it, but they don't have the opportunity to isolate in a basement or an attic or somewhere separated from the family. They don't have the resources to miss work and to be quarantined away from their family. And then furthermore, farm workers, being Hispanics and others, have a higher incidences of chronic underlying illnesses like diabetes, obesity, and others, and asthma, those illnesses that render one at higher risk of dying from COVID-19 if they get infected. And then we know that farm worker communities like Coachella and others are at high risk of being under-resourced, not enough testing, not enough vaccines, not enough doctors, not enough clinics in our communities to see farm workers. As chairman of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, I can assure you that we are doing all we can to help farm workers and their families. Last Congress, the Congressional Hispanic Caucus endorsed the Farm Worker Modernization Act, a bill that creates a workforce solution for America's agriculture industry by providing stability, predictability, and fairness to one of the most critical sectors of our nation's economy. That bill is imminent in being introduced in the House either later this week or early next week, and we will be taking a vote on that bill with a passage, I'll keep my fingers crossed, in March. And then we have a President Biden, that on day one of his administration unveiled the U.S. Citizenship Act and 2 CHC members and our Representative Linda Sanchez from California and our Senator Bob Menendez from New Jersey, both of them Congressional Hispanic Caucus members, introduced those bills. We had a good press conference last week, and we're moving that bill forward both in the House and the Senate. And under the U.S. Citizenship Act, immigrant farm workers who meet specific requirements would become immediately eligible for green cards. After 3 years, all green card holders would pass additional background checks and demonstrate knowledge of English and U.S. civics, would be able to apply to become citizens. The bill protects workers who are victims of workplace retaliation from deportation in order to allow labor agencies to interview these workers without repercussions. It also protects migrant and seasonal workers, of which my family were, and increases penalties for employers who violate labor laws. And I'm proud to say the Congressional Hispanic Caucus has already endorsed the U.S. Citizenship Act and is actively working to get it passed. It is a big bill. There's so much more than the farm worker provisions. It is a large reform bill that will fix our immigration system once and for all. We are also looking to include pathway to citizenship for essential immigrant workers in the next infrastructure and job package that we expect to move through the budget reconciliation process. The CHC is committed to passing immigration reform and getting something to the president's desk to sign into law. And besides immigration, the CHC is laser focused on helping our communities recover from COVID-19. And we're also doing the outreach to inform the farm workers that there is no questions on citizenship if they get a vaccine, which I encourage. We're working on doing the outreach in Spanish and in ways that farm workers can understand the information and feel empowered to build public confidence in the vaccine and developing projects. This initial bill has $20 billion for vaccine programs that partner with local community groups to get the vaccine and the information out to the hardest hit communities like farm workers. And also, we're working to distribute PPE in an equitable manner. We've partnered with Farmworker Justice in order to do that as well. And just last week, I just want to let you know that oftentimes I put on my doctor hat, which gives me great joy and is part of my spirituality of getting my hands really into the service in serving our most vulnerable. And throughout this pandemic, I have been out at farm worker trailer parks, schools, and churches in farm worker communities with nonprofit organizations like a free clinic, Coachella Valley Volunteers in Medicine, and have really brought testing into the farm worker community. And recently, we're taking that model with the county and other providers who have access to the vaccines to really take the vaccines into the community as well. More needs to be done. We need the commitment. We need a prioritization of farm workers as a high-risk essential workers to be in the early phases, but we also need the resources allocated to those communities, and we need the boots on the ground because public health is practiced on the ground. So we need the partnerships with the organizations, the growers, the farm workers, the county, the public health departments to do the kind of work that I've done here throughout our country. CHC also looks forward to working with Farmworker Justice and continuing to uplift the stories of farm workers and their families to humanize the conditions farm workers face every day. We especially hope to highlight the stories of the many Latina single mother farm workers who experience even more hardships. Women have been one of the groups hardest hit by the pandemic job losses, and Latina farm workers are among those numbers. As they face the brunt of responsibilities in finding childcare, oftentimes they're concerned about whether or not they're going to be separated from their families. And according to a study done by the NIH in 2016, even before the pandemic, Latina farm workers faced increased risk factors to their health due to the work climate and psychological demands associated with the job. it is critical that we address women's health and childcare needs, specifically when it comes to COVID-19 and farm worker legislation. The CHC is committed to working on these issues more with our colleagues in Congress, as well as President Biden and Vice President Harris in their first 100 days and beyond. And to get juntos, we can advance public policy that creates lasting changes for farm workers and their families and work to ensure the promise of America is accessible to the 60 million Hispanics living across our country. Seguimos adelante, nunca nos rendimos y siempre vamos a seguir hasta la victoria, porque tenemos un gran trabajo para traer justicia a los campesinos. Thank you very much for having me today. I will now turn the program over to Farmworker Justice President Bruce Goldstein.
Well, before you go, we don't want you to go away. We have a couple of questions for you, Congressman, Doctor, if we prefer to do it that way. Tell me a little bit about, you've been working with the mayor of Coachella on Hero Pay. Can you explain to us what that project is about?
Well, I'll tell you, I will not take any credit for that, because that initiated by through the mayor and the city council of Coachella on their own. They're the first city council to approve Hero Pay, and it's basically a hazard pay. So all the essential workers who have bared the brunt of the infection with themselves and their families will get an increase in their salaries until they get vaccinated. And so that was instituted under the city council vote in the city of Coachella, my hometown, and they've been recognized for that. And that includes grocery workers, that includes farm workers and other food production line workers.
And also, before you leave, I know you're a doctor, but you also get, doctors always also get sick. You had your own bout with COVID-19.
Yeah, mira, Maria,
That experience was like, please.
Yes, and thank you, Maria Elena. So interesting, because many of my colleagues were asking me, well, didn't you get the vaccine? And people were wondering why I didn't get the vaccine when it was available very early for senators and for Congress members. And for me in mi corazón, I just couldn't get it before the farm workers got it, and the farm workers that I grew up with. So I decided to wait until the farm workers were eligible in my district so that I would get it with them, in solidarity with them. And in turn, I would also vaccinate them after I got it. But unfortunately, because of the January 6th attack on the Capitol, I was one of the last to be evacuated from the House gallery, the floor, and we were all in a safe room where we were exposed to members from the other party who refused to wear a mask, even though they were politely requested to wear one. And that's where I got the infection. And I got some of the typical symptoms. The headache, the fatigue, the fever, shortness of breath with a dry cough. I chronicled my experience on Facebook as a doctor. I talked about how I managed it. I talked about my nutrition as medicine and what kind of foods I ate. And I also talked about the different types of medicine and supplementary vitamins that are necessary when one gets sick and not necessarily in the hospital. And so just for my farm worker friends who are looking now, I would recommend that you start taking zinc and vitamin D and vitamin C, because those who are low on vitamin D get more severe illness if they do get infected, and those that are low in zinc get worse outcomes from COVID-19. Many of us don't know if we're low on vitamin D or zinc. Farm workers, because of their exposure to the sun, would probably have higher rates of vitamin D, but there's still low rates amongst us. So what I would recommend is that you start taking those vitamin supplements as early as possible. And one of my nutritional dishes while I was sick in isolation was a good old-fashioned comfort food from my days as a child in the farm worker community, which is una olla de frijoles pintos con ajo y cebolla y chile verde, and that has your protein, it has your zinc, it has your antioxidants, and it with the chile verde, the green peppers, it has your multivitamins. So our food is healthy. We just need to have the justice in order to afford fresh fruits and vegetables and be able to eat the food that we pick from the fields.
Right. Wow, that's wonderful. Not only did we get some very valuable information from you, but also your recetas and una consulta gratis. So thank you very much, doctor, and thank you very much, Congressman.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your perspective on the issues that farm workers are facing. You know, your consistent advocacy for farm worker communities is the kind of leadership that is needed pues more often here at the national level. So thank you so much for that, Congressman Dr. Ruiz. And now I would like to introduce the president of Farmworker Justice, Bruce Goldstein. Bruce joined Farmworker Justice as a staff attorney 33 years ago after practicing labor and civil rights law in the Midwest. Bruce's activities have included advocacy in administrative agencies and Congress, building coalitions, advising grassroots organizations, litigating high-impact cases against employers and government, training of legal professionals, and shaping public opinion through publications and the media. During his tenure, FJ has continued its longstanding role as a national leader in advocating for immigration reform legislation, improving labor and occupational safety protections, expanding access to healthcare, building capacity of farm workers organizations, and improving corporate responsibility in the food supply chain. Bruce represents Farmworker Justice on the National Hispanic Leadership Agenda, a coalition of 40 prominent national Latino organizations. Bruce is a co-founder and board member of the Equitable Food Initiative, an innovative corporate social responsibility project. Bruce Goldstein, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Maria Elena. And yes, I'm Bruce Goldstein, president of Farmworker Justice. It is my privilege to lead this great organization and provide farm workers and their organizations with help they vitally need. Thank you all in the audience for attending. I appreciate the support that many in the audience have provided to Farmworker Justice. And many thanks again to Maria Elena Salinas, Representative Ruiz, Emma Torres, Suget Lopez, and my colleagues at Farmworker Justice who are speaking today. This is a moment of great opportunity to make serious progress. The new administration and Congress have the potential for making important changes in policy that can improve the lives of hundreds of thousands of farmworker families and create more responsible food and agriculture systems. We ask for your support at this important time to enable Farmworker Justice to fulfill its mission. The mission of Farmworker Justice is to empower farm workers to improve their immigration status, wages, working conditions, occupational safety, health, and access to justice. The key word is empower. We help farm workers and their organizations build and exercise their power to win changes that improve their living and working conditions. Farmworker Justice long ago decided to take a multifaceted approach to fulfilling our mission. We monitor and analyze federal and state policies and their implementation, advocate in federal agencies, Congress, and state governments, bring high-impact lawsuits against employers for systemic violations of farm worker rights, and against government agencies that refuse to follow the law. We support farm labor organizing and community mobilization in many locations around the country. We engage in corporate social responsibility initiatives to reform the food supply chain regarding farm workers' conditions. We educate the public and policymakers through publications, special events, and traditional and social media. And to carry out all these strategies, we build collaborations and coalitions to increase support for farm workers' agendas, because farm worker organizations and their advocates can't do it alone. At least 1/2 of the nation's farm workers, and probably much more, are undocumented. Most of the undocumented farm workers have been in the US for many years, and they have families who are settled here. Their undocumented status interferes with every effort that farm workers are making to improve their living and working conditions. The fear of arrest and deportation inhibits them from seeking medical care, enforcing labor rights, joining a labor union, and speaking publicly to have their stories told. Farm workers have always been essential workers in our agriculture and food systems, but now, because of the pandemic, it's official. Government says farm workers are essential workers to our food and agriculture systems, and the government expects them to continue to work through the pandemic as they have. We have been working with other organizations on several strategies that you will hear more about from my colleagues. I will briefly outline them. We're all about solutions. The most urgent need is to address the pandemic, and we are helping farm worker organizations in many ways, from support to community-based organizations to address the pandemic to federal policy advocacy. Of critical importance is immigration policy reform. We have the best opportunity in many years to win major immigration reform that is signed by the president. The Biden-Harris administration drafted an extensive immigration bill that was introduced last week, as you heard, by Senator Bob Menendez and Representative Linda Sanchez. It is called the U.S. Citizenship Act. It contains specific provisions about farm workers that would allow current undocumented farm workers and their family members to obtain legal immigration status and citizenship. We have a fact sheet on the bill on our website. You may recall that in December 2019, the House passed a bipartisan immigration bill called the Farm Workforce Modernization Act, which we were instrumental in winning, along with the United Farm Workers. The bill passed with 34 Republican votes, but Mitch McConnell refused to bring it to a vote in the Senate. With the change in the presidency and Senate leadership, there is a real possibility of winning major immigration reform for millions of people. Success requires urgent action in these few months. With your support, Farmworker Justice will continue to play a leading role in the campaign for positive immigration reform. A major component of immigration policy and the realities for farm workers is the H-2A Agricultural Guest Worker Program. The H-2A program has increased substantially and rapidly recently to 275,000 approved jobs in 2020. The Trump administration sought to slash the main wage rate protection in the H-2A program. With our co-counsel, we represented the United Farm Workers and the UFW Foundation in successful litigation against the Trump administration. Yesterday, the Department of Labor issued the new wage rates as a result of our lawsuits. Across the nation, the wage rates at H-2A program employers are increasing by an average of 5% from last year, instead of being frozen at last year's wages. The Trump administration said that its regulation would have cost farm workers an average of $170 million per year over 10 years, and that was an underestimate. Now we must reform the H-2A guest worker program to reduce its abuses. The future farm workers in this country should not be relegated to a guest worker status. They should have the opportunity for permanent lawful resident status and citizenship. Turning to labor and occupational safety laws and regulations, we will continue to work at the federal and state levels to end the discrimination against farm workers in federal and state employment laws. We will do that through advocacy and litigation. We will also demand more and better quality enforcement of the labor protections that do apply to farm workers. There is very weak enforcement, so many employers feel like it's in their interest to violate the law because they won't get caught. And if they do get caught, they won't be punished very seriously. We have the opportunity to work with the Department of Health and Human Services to substantially improve farm workers' access to healthcare, to vaccines, and to information and services that enable them to live healthy lives. At the Department of Agriculture, we are advocating for major changes. Historically, the USDA has viewed its constituency primarily as farm owners and operators, and not the workers laboring on the farms. Billions of dollars in grants are given to farmers each year, but virtually nothing is given to farm worker serving organizations by the USDA to improve farm workers' lives and infrastructure in their communities. We will continue to work on corporate social responsibility initiatives, including the Equitable Food Initiative, which we co-founded and is expanding. We are demonstrating that fair treatment and empowerment of farm workers is good for business. It's good for farm workers, it's good for growers, it's good for the retailers and the restaurant chains that sell the food that farm workers produce. With your support, we will continue our capacity building assistance to community-based organizations on all these issues. Our farm worker focused train-the-trainer programs are highly regarded and in demand. You'll probably hear from our community partners about our work on training videos around sexual harassment in agricultural workplaces. We're constantly asked to provide our analyses of legislative and administrative policy proposals by local organizations. We're asked for materials in languages that farm workers understand about how to prevent violations of their rights, how to improve health and safety, and how to get involved in public policy debates that determine much about their lives. All of these activities require resources. We are a very frugal organization. We work on a shoestring, but it still takes a lot of resources to enable the talented staff at Farmworker Justice to fulfill our mission of justice for farm workers. I hope you will help Farmworker Justice seize the opportunities that we now have to advance the cause of farmworker justice. Again, thank you very much for attending and for your support. We appreciate it greatly.
Thank you very much, Bruce. Thank you, Bruce. Next, allow me to introduce Iris Figueroa, Director of Economic and Environmental Justice. Ms. Figueroa has worked at Farmworker Justice since 2016. She engages in advocacy and community education for farm workers on issues related to immigration, labor rights, and occupational health and safety. Previously, Ms. Figueroa worked at various civil society organizations throughout the US and in Latin America for the protection and advancement of economic and social rights, including in Guatemala, Honduras, and Costa Rica. Ms. Figueroa is a native Spanish speaker and a graduate of Georgetown University and Columbia Law School. Iris, adelante. And thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Maria, for your kind introduction. Before I get into the details of our work, I want to highlight two themes or approaches that are really common to all of the work that we do. The first is having a comprehensive strategy to achieve our goals. We want to use all the tools at our disposal, whether it's advocacy, litigation, on-the-ground community education, to achieve the objectives that will make farm workers' lives better. The second is the intersectionality of our issues. Farm workers living and working conditions really showcase how different challenges can affect and exacerbate each other, so that it's the totality of those challenges and the way they come together that impacts farm workers' lives. And so even though we'll be talking about these different issues in turn, we don't view them as silos, but rather as equally important parts of a whole. So one important part of that overall challenge, of course, is immigration status and the need for immigration reform. Bruce and Congressman Reese both talked about the importance of immigration status and the way that it impacts so many aspects of workers' lives and their ability or willingness to step forward if there's violations of other rights or other workplace issues. We are, as Bruce mentioned, supportive of the many exciting legislative vehicles that may be moving forward in the coming weeks and months. And we'll hope that that'll help us to achieve one of our long-standing and fundamental goals, which is ensuring that there's a path to citizenship for farm workers. I now want to turn and talk a little bit about our occupational health and safety work. As I'm sure many of you know, farm workers face numerous health risks as they do the hard work of feeding us. They are at increased risk of exposure to pesticides, heat stress, smoke from wildfires, and in the past year, COVID-19. My colleague Alexis Gild will provide more details on our COVID-specific work shortly, but I do want to mention some of the advocacy that we have been continuously doing with government agencies on some of those other issues, including with the Environmental Protection Agency and OSHA, to make sure that farm worker voices are heard and that they are treated as the key stakeholders that they are and should be in addressing these issues. We also challenge unsafe working conditions or rule changes that will harm farm workers in the courts. One recent example is a lawsuit that we've been working on along with Earth Justice related to the application exclusion zone. So under the EPA, under the Trump administration, the EPA issued a new rule that would have increased the risk of exposure to pesticides for both farm workers and bystanders by relaxing the safety precautions that pesticide applicators need to follow. We have been successful so far in that litigation and are hopeful that thanks to our efforts, the weakening of that rule will not go into effect. We also produce a range of educational materials on some of these topics aimed at both farm workers and farm worker serving organizations, so that workers know how to best mitigate these risks and protect themselves. Some recent examples include a medical legal partnership guide for farm worker advocates, as well as related webinar, a clinician's guide to the worker protection standard, which is the main regulation protecting workers from pesticides, and a webinar on disaster preparedness, focused specifically on effective responses to both wildfires and hurricanes. We are also continuing to collaborate with broader coalitions of environmental and workers' rights groups to address the issue of environmental justice, and particularly the disparate impact of climate change on farm worker communities. Another big part of what we do is demand effective enforcement of labor laws, as well as the end to discrimination against farm workers in these laws. Historically, farm workers have been excluded from many of the basic rights and protections that other workers have, including overtime pay, collective bargaining rights, and access to workers' compensation. Farmworker Justice works at both the state and national level to end these exclusions and obtain equal treatment under the law for agricultural workers. The Biden immigration reform bill that was referenced earlier also incorporates now Vice President Harris's Fairness for Farm Workers Act, which Farmworker Justice and partners worked on during the last Congress with then Senator Harris, which would eliminate the existing exclusions for farm workers from overtime pay and minimum wage. Another important project that we want to share is a public-facing project called Mapping Inequality, Farm Workers' Rights Under State Employment Laws. As I mentioned, many people may not be aware of the various longstanding and unfair exclusions of farm workers from federal and state labor protections. So we've created a tool to educate the public, which is a 50-state map summarizing farm worker-related laws in each state. I think they just put up the link. Oh, and we might get a quick demo. And so we were lucky to have the collaboration of local legal services organizations that serve farm workers, as well as various law schools, in getting together the information for the map content. And it is an educational tool, but it can also serve as an advocacy tool for advocates to be able to compare and contrast protections in different states and look at what might be models in different states. So for example, if you click on the state of California, you can scroll down and see some of the different issues that we work on, including minimum wage, overtime, workers' compensation, field sanitation, occupational safety and health. And two other important components of the information that's in there is the state agency that's charged with actually enforcing these protections, as well as a link to the legal services providers that serve farm workers in that state. And so we thought that was really important to make sure that the tool not only provides information, but also allows people to take the next step if they want to go forward and try to make a claim and make those protections real. Finally, we also collaborate with partners at the state level as they work to improve and advance state level protections for farm workers in their own legislatures. Thank you, and I look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you very much, Edith, for that great presentation. I do have a question. Edith, the cross-section of immigrant and labor rights has been a hot button issue for decades, as we know, but what is it about this moment in our nation's history that makes it a potential turning point in the fight to secure a better future for our nation's agricultural workers?
Thank you, Maria. I do agree. I think it should be a turning point. I think there are various factors that make this a unique time in our history when it comes to that intersection of immigration and labor rights, as well as the visibility of farm workers as essential workers in our society. The COVID-19 crisis has really pulled back the veil on some of the pre-existing conditions that these workers were facing and how so many immigrants and essential workers are left out of the basic safety net. At the same time, the relentless attacks against immigrants during the previous administration showed just how broken our immigration system really is. And so I think that going forward, particularly with the Biden administration, it cannot just continue to be business as usual on these issues. So there is a really exciting window of opportunity to right some of the fundamental, long-standing injustices that farm workers have faced.
Muchas gracias, Iris. Thank you so much.
Hello.
Oh, our next speaker is Alexis Gild, Director of Health Policy and Programs. Alexis Gild has been with Farmworker Justice since 2011. In her role as Director of Health Policy and Programs, she coordinates FJ's health promotion projects and health policy advocacy. She works with advocacy organizations, community immigrant health centers, farm worker community-based organizations, and legal service organizations to provide healthcare access for farm workers and their families across the United States. Alexis has extensive experience in public health and community organizing. She worked on political campaigns and grassroots organizations. She also served as a health education volunteer with the U.S. Peace Corps in Guatemala. She graduated from Wellesley College and has a master's degree in public policy from the University of Michigan. Alexis lives in Oakland, California. Alexis.
Thank you so much, Maria Elena. And, you know, COVID-19 has really highlighted how vulnerable farm workers are in terms of their health access and access to healthcare. They were labeled essential workers, but they did not receive the protection standards or the protective equipment that they required to work without putting themselves or their families at risk. And the wildfires last year here in California, as well as in Washington and Oregon, worsened those conditions as farm workers continue to labor in the fields despite the hazardous air quality and heat. At Farmworker Justice, our health work is primarily focused on two areas: increasing access to healthcare and addressing social determinants of health to create systemic change. We accomplish these goals through advocating for better policies on healthcare and worker protections, community partnerships, and litigation. You may have heard, and it's been identified in the previous discussions, you know, farm workers face numerous barriers to healthcare access, and these barriers include transportation, lack of information about available resources such as health centers, workplace policies, including lack of sick leave, lack of protective equipment, and adequate workplace protections, low wages, cultural and linguistic barriers, lack of health insurance, and of course, fear of persecution and immigration consequences. And this includes public charge and other immigration policies that prevent or deter eligible farm workers from accessing Medicaid, SNAP, and other public benefits due to misinformation and fear of detention or deportation. Our health promotion work is framed around three basic concepts: addressing social determinants of health, cultural and linguistic competency, and health equity. One of the building blocks of our health promotion work is training promotores de salud, or community health workers at community-based organizations. The promotores de salud provide education and information to farm workers in their communities on occupational safety and health topics and connect them to resources. These community-based organizations are trusted and respected in their communities and therefore are the most effective messengers for health promotion. Our partnerships are extensive. We partner with farmworker community-based organizations such as Líderes Campesinas and Campesinos Sin Fronteras, who we'll hear from shortly, as well as health centers, legal services providers, migrant and seasonal Head Start, and labor unions, among many others. These partnerships allow us to facilitate referrals for farm workers to accessible resources, ensure that our tools and resources are being used to respond appropriately to address the needs of farm workers and farm worker serving organizations. They ensure that accurate information is being disseminated to organizations and the farm workers they serve. And most importantly, these partnerships allow the promotion of a holistic and systemic approach to farm worker health. One example I want to highlight is a new project that will be focused on skin cancer. We are partnering with migrant health centers in California and North Carolina to engage in a patient navigator program that will enhance farm worker access to skin cancer screening and treatment. These patient navigators will be trained to help farm worker patients address the social determinants of health they experience when trying to access specialty care. It will also include training for dermatologists on cultural and linguistic competency for farm worker patients. By adopting a holistic approach to address barriers to specialty care, we hope to empower workers to identify and treat early stages of skin cancer and create a model to facilitate access to other types of specialty care. We also aim to add to the current data on skin cancer prevalence among farmworker communities, of which there is a significant dearth, and we are seeking additional opportunities to expand the scope of the project. But along with our health promotion work, we also advocate for better working conditions, increased protections, and policies that will improve healthcare access. Our health policy work seeks to lift the voices of farm workers at the national and state level. It is informed by our community partners and our health promotion projects. We work primarily at the federal level with both Congress and the administration, and my colleague Edith Figueroa has mentioned a few of our recent examples of our occupational safety and health policy, but I also just want to share a couple of our health policy access to healthcare policy advocacy projects. One includes improving and preserving access to the Affordable Care Act and the federal marketplaces for farm workers and limited English proficient individuals, as well as advocating for a halt in the public charge rule implementation, working in coalition with state and national partners to inform and advocate. We have coordinated comments with farm worker advocates in response to rules by the Department of Homeland Security and Department of State. We have developed a module on farm workers and public charge for service providers as part of an immigrant and benefits work group here in California. And we also are a plaintiff in litigation. Looking ahead, we are working to ensure expanded and comprehensive access for farm worker communities to the Affordable Care Act marketplaces, including expansion of tax credits and subsidies to farm workers, outreach and navigator programs to ensure that farm workers are able to access the marketplaces and access healthcare providers and others, as well as language access. But of course, COVID-19 is at the forefront of all of our minds, and the COVID-19 pandemic has been especially devastating for farm worker communities. Farm workers, as has been explained, are at heightened risk for COVID due to their living and working conditions, as well as their poor health outcomes. Farm workers have a prevalence of diabetes, respiratory issues, and other chronic conditions that make them more susceptible to COVID complications. We know that farm workers are contracting COVID and dying from COVID. According to data collected by Purdue University, close to 500,000 workers have contracted COVID since the beginning of the pandemic. But this number is likely an underestimate, and Farmworker Justice is working with the Environmental Working Group to track COVID cases among farm workers in the United States. But farm worker data is generally difficult to obtain. Farm workers generally, as I mentioned earlier, lack access to healthcare, so farm workers may not have access to testing or know how to access testing. We also have heard that many workers may be fearful of a stigma associated with COVID, or may be fearful of any employer retaliation if they test positive for COVID, if testing is even available. We've also heard anecdotally that COVID positive workers have been told to work under threat of deportation or being fired. Their increased risk of COVID is due to conditions that are often beyond their control, which makes it hard for them to follow the CDC recommendations. Many lack access to hand washing stations in the fields. They are unable to physically distance from other workers in the fields, as well as in the transportation to and from the fields. They also often live in crowded and inadequate housing, either by their employer or in the community, without proper ventilation or access to sanitation supplies or running water. And actually, many lack access to masks. Since the beginning of the pandemic, Farmworker Justice has been working with farm worker advocates and public health experts across the country to improve COVID protections for farm workers and to ensure farm workers have access to accurate information about COVID. We have been advocating for implementation of an OSHA emergency temporary standard for workplaces that will include agricultural workers, including protections for housing and transportation. We also have been providing policy recommendations to the administration and Congress. We are supporting and tracking efforts at the state and national level to implement regulations and guidance for agricultural workplaces, as well as vaccine distribution in farm worker communities. We also, of course, have been advocating for the prioritization of farm workers for vaccine distribution and for the inclusion of stakeholders in the development of a strategy that is comprehensive and innovative that addresses the challenges faced by farm worker communities. We are sharing information and stories about the impact of COVID and the need to prioritize farm workers for vaccine distribution with media outlets and through our social media. Last year, towards the beginning of the pandemic, we hosted a Facebook series called The State of Farm Workers in the COVID-19 Era. It featured politicians, celebrities, community leaders, and our Farmworker Justice staff. And we will be hosting another series shortly. We are also developing materials for advocates and workers. We have developed issue briefs and fact sheets on different policies at the federal level around COVID. We also are developing PAs in Mixteco and Spanish with Líderes Campesinas. We are also developing fotonovelas in Spanish and English around COVID information, COVID messaging, and the vaccine. And we are also developing other educational materials for families, including a loteria game that will be available in English, Spanish, Haitian Creole, and Mixteco, as well as activity books. We also, after hearing that farm workers were not being provided masks by their employers, we decided to work with partners to help get masks to farm workers and their families. We partnered with a group of mask making volunteers to connect them to farm workers serving organizations, including community-based organizations and migrant and seasonal Head Start. And to this day, we have distributed over 45,000 masks to farm worker communities in California, Arizona, Florida, Washington, Oregon, Michigan, Idaho, Tennessee, Georgia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. And we're continuing to work with this group of mask making volunteers to get more masks out to farm worker communities. We are continuing our efforts to get masks to farm workers, ensure access to COVID testing and treatment and vaccines, and to implement mandated protections. Thank you so much, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Alexis. It's fascinating to see what you guys have been able to accomplish in the past year. Now, the pandemic obviously exacerbated the health issues that farm workers were facing beforehand. What, in your opinion, was the most valuable tool or resource that you guys used to fight the effects of COVID on the farm worker community?
Thank you so much for that question. You know, I will say that the most valuable tool was our community partners. Their experiences informed our policy advocacy and our materials. All of our materials go to our community partners to ensure that they are accessible and relevant for the farm worker communities that we serve. They also connected workers to testing, food, healthcare, and other community resources throughout the pandemic. And in the absence of a federal standard, we supported their efforts at the state level to implement workplace protections for agricultural workers in states like California and Washington and Oregon, among others. You know, and as I shared, many of the conditions that make workers vulnerable to COVID are really beyond their control. So we really need strong protections that are enforceable to ensure that workers are able to work safely without risking their health and well-being, and our partners are crucial in that effort.
Thanks for that, Alexis.
Thank you. And as I mentioned, you know, Farmworker Justice is a national advocacy organization in the nation's capital. But as you've heard from Bruce, Edie, and myself, our work extends into local communities across the nation. Throughout its 40 years, Farmworker Justice has engaged in many fruitful partnerships across the country. One of these partnerships has been with Campesinos Sin Fronteras, based in Yuma County, Arizona, along the US-Mexico border. Since 1999, Campesinos Sin Fronteras has been dedicated to providing the low-income agricultural community of Arizona with the resources to reduce their health and social vulnerability. Emma Torres has served as executive director of Campesinos Sin Fronteras for 10 years. And under her leadership, Campesinos Sin Fronteras has gone from a two-person movement to an organization with over 30 staff and a strong community volunteer program. Emma, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Alexis. I'm very honored to be part of this wonderful event. The Farmworker Justice has put together. We have been partners for over 25 years. I go back to when Shelley Davis would come to Yuma County to advocate for pesticide safety laws and HIV/AIDS programs that we started with our promotoras. So I was fortunate to be able to know Cesar Chavez and be in the strike in La Huelga in Salinas, California, and here in Yuma, Arizona. And Yuma is located in the very US-Mexico border with where we have California and two states to the south that we border with. Approximately 1.5 million people live in this community. Although it's desert, it's because of the Colorado River. We have very fertile lands that allows us to be the lettuce capital of the world during the winter months. And so we have many thousands of farm workers that live in this community that also come from Imperial County and from across the border on a daily basis. We get approximately 20,000 farm workers that come every morning from San Luis, Rio Colorado. And a lot of them are H-2A workers, a lot of young workers that are temporarily visa holders that we work with. So, having been a farm worker when I grew up, like Congressman Reese mentioned, I have it in my DNA for probably centuries. We are very familiar with this population's needs. We are part of them, and we know their struggles, we know their issues, and we also have their trust. I founded Campesinos Sin Fronteras 21 years now ago, and I have been also one of the pioneers of the community health worker model that we started actually working with farm worker women. They were the first promotoras that existed here, at least in Arizona, in 1987 when we started that model. And with that model, again, recruiting from the same farm worker population to then train them to go back to their communities to assist their peers. That's how we've been very effective in reaching thousands and thousands of farm workers on a yearly basis. As it was mentioned, we've been partnering with Farmworker Justice for, I believe it was since 1997 that we started working, that Shelley will come down to Yuma. And it's been a great partnership because we are grassroots. We are here in the community. We're dealing with the day-to-day issues of our farm worker population. Oftentimes the needs are so great that we are not necessarily able to go and advocate for policy changes at the national level or state level. So we need those strong partners to do that work for us and be able to represent the needs of our population and advocate for them. So we have been working with Farmworker Justice for many years, as I mentioned, addressing pesticide safety, HIV/AIDS, skin cancer, and lately COVID. We've been fortunate to continue partnering with them and receive their support in reference to PPE that were non-existent here in our community for our population. We conduct early outreach. We start at 2 a.m. in the morning. That's when our farm workers start crossing from San Luis into the U.S. to pick up their bus and go to work. It's been mentioned a lot about them, farm workers being considered essential workers, but then they are treated as disposable workers because there are no priority given to them in reference to protection, like no testing, no vaccines, no vaccinations. Our agricultural season, agriculture is seasonal here, and they're about to go back to Salinas. So they were here since back in October, And now they're going back next month to Salinas and here and to other places. And they didn't get the test. So they're gonna have to go somewhere over there and get tested. We conducted testing because we're working with ASU, with other partners and our Farm Worker Service Coalition locally. We were able to conduct testing one day at the port of entry, and it was voluntary because, again, the farm workers didn't want it to test because they didn't have a place to quarantine. And so they would not say if they were tested. And then the employers would not ask them or would not avail the testing for fear of not having a workforce. That, you know, again, we're seasonal. We are the lettuce capital of the country, and it's very much dependent on these essential workers, you know, that the workforce will help harvest, you know, the lettuce and other vegetables that we have. So it's been very sad. I have screamed with different people being in different areas and committees. I think I'm like in 10 or 12 different committees, from local to national committees, telling them, hey, this is happening, this is what's going on. And still, you know, there is no, at the local level, it's very hard sometimes if the resources are not there to be provide the services to the population. As I mentioned, I have grown up in all my life working in agriculture, and Cesar Chavez was an inspiration, definitely, when we were very young, and seeing what, and remembering the word that he would say, that, you know, that si se puede, and we believe that we could have a life of with dignity and respect. And I don't know, Alexis, if I'm running out of time, you know, I'm not being able to, I know I had 5 minutes. So am I fine with my time?
You are great. Thank you so much, Emma. We really appreciate you being here, for joining us, and for all the work that you're doing in Yuma County, and for always being a steadfast partner with Farmworker Justice. So thank you so much. While agricultural work has traditionally been dominated by men, the number of women working in the fields has steadily increased in the last few decades. And Líderes Campesinas de California represents the result of decades of farmworker women working as grassroots mobilizers to improve the lives of farmworker communities. Suget Lopez has been a part of this movement since 2006 and has served as the organization's executive director for the past 10 years. Suget, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, everyone. Hola a todos. Gracias por la invitación. Thank you so much for the invitation. My name is Suget Lopez, and today I have the honor to represent Líderes Campesinas, the only statewide network of female farm workers that over 30 years has led the movement to end all forms of violence against farm worker women and girls in California. Our mission is to strengthen the leadership of farm worker women and girls to be agents of social, economic, and political change to ensure our human rights. We are a community-driven, community-led organization with most of our members and staff coming directly from farm worker families. I personally come from a farm worker family. My grandfather came to the US as a bracero several decades ago. Every year, we reach out to thousands of peers utilizing a variety of popular education activities, such as theater skits, and in various languages to provide outreach and education, direct services, and technical assistance to our community. Our organizing efforts have focused on addressing the intersection of the many issues hurting our community, especially farm worker women, such as wage theft, discrimination, pesticide exposure, heat stress, domestic violence, sexual harassment, sexual assault in the workplace, undocumented status, child sexual abuse, amongst many other situations, and now COVID. We not only advocate on behalf of farm workers, but also advocate for opportunities for female farm workers' voices to be heard directly, to address the various systems inequities that contribute to the harms to farm worker communities. Last year, for example, we prepared and sent to our governor in California a letter identifying 8 different areas that we had identified as the greatest need in the time of COVID. This was issued early on in the pandemic on April 1st. One of the things that we had advocated for was for various education and services to be brought directly into the fields. Something that, as we were exploring that and being vocal about it, we had been criticized and maybe thought of like, that's not possible. That's never going to happen. There's no way that we can bring those services directly into the fields. And now I'm very happy to see how it has bloomed, that effort, like right now with the vaccinations happening, all of these events, COVID testing, vaccinations across the various counties in California are actually happening in the fields, thanks to collaborations and partnership with the growers, with the county agencies, Department of Public Health, community-based organizations that have community health workers, such as in our case, that are trusted messengers that are helping to get the word out, educate the community, inform them about various concerns that they have. And so I'm pleased to see all that growing and happening as we speak in California. Líderes Campesinas, along with Campesinos Sin Fronteras, are also partners on a national Farmworker Women national movement through Alianza Nacional de Campesinas. And I'm very, very happy to say that over the years, Farmworker Justice has not only been supportive of Líderes Campesinas, which has been in existence for over 30 years, but also for the past decade helped with the formal institutionalizing of that national network of farmworker women and girls. With Líderes, we have not only, or with Farmworker Justice, have not only produced many of the different tools that have been talked about during this presentation, such as the Breaking the Silence, and now we're working on a radionovela on COVID, but we have also joined forces to advocate. And again, not just to advocate on behalf, but to advocate for the women to be heard directly at a national level as well. So I'm very honored for our partnership with Farmworker Justice throughout these years. And thank you so much for the invitation.
Muchísimas gracias. Thank you so much, Suget. And also thank you very much to Alexis and Emma for your presentation, and also thank you for everything that you do. Over the past hour, we have heard about the multifaceted approach Farmworker Justice has taken to empower this country's agricultural laborers. Neither the contribution of these workers to American society nor the exploitation they face on a daily basis can be overstated. So now that we have heard about the impactful social justice work that Farmworker Justice engages in, I invite members of the audience to ask any questions they have for any members of the Farm Workers team. And we do have some questions that have already been posted throughout this session. So I will begin with some of them. We're going to begin with a question from Jules Chavez to Alexis. California agribusiness is a $54 billion industry generating $100 billion. What is their role in vaccine advocacy, and will FJ be collaborating with any of the growers? And if so, what is the strategy in telling that story to our farm worker communities and their families' health? Alexis.
So thank you for that question. We have seen employers who really do want to get the vaccine to their workers, and there have been efforts in California to bring in employers. And when we talk about vaccine prioritization and we talk about that comprehensive and innovative strategy, we want to include employers, because employers are able to get the vaccine to their workers. They can bring the vaccine on site to make it easier for them to get vaccinated, provide accommodations to workers who want to get vaccinated. In Riverside County, I know that they've been vaccinating farm workers, and they have included a myriad of stakeholders, including employers, in that effort. So certainly, we believe it's important to bring in employers. Employers have certainly been willing to be a part of the effort to bring vaccines to the workers, and we are supportive of that effort.
Okay, great, thank you. To Edis, Edis and Bruce, can you give a ballpark success rate for your court actions and separately for your advocacy efforts in the Capitol? Who would like to take that, Bruce or Edis?
I guess I should try. I'll just say that it's kind of impossible to to give statistics on victories, but in the courts. But recently, we have won pretty much every lawsuit that we filed that has come to fruition. The case against the Trump administration for the public charge immigration rule, the litigation against the Department of Agriculture under Trump for canceling the Farm Labor Survey, the litigation against the Trump Department of Labor for trying to freeze the farm worker wages. So recently we've had some pretty big success, really high impact. On advocacy in Congress, that's a challenge. It's hard to measure success in Congress because so much of what we have to do each year is stop bad things from happening. And for that, we have a really high success rate. A lot of bad labor and immigration bills about farm workers are introduced every Congress, and we've been stopping these bad bills. And hopefully now we'll build on the success in 2019 in the House of Representatives with the Farm Workforce Modernization Act and pass immigration legislation.
Yes, it's a hot potato no one wants to take on. It's a very difficult issue. And as a journalist, of course, are following it very closely. This question is for Edis, from Edis Gonro. What is the best way to engage with farm worker justice?
So that's a great question. I think there's a couple of different ways to engage, depending on what folks' particular roles are. We've put out information on how to donate and help us bolster our resources. There's also a lot of local partners or people with expertise on some of the issues that we already work on. And so we have a newsletter. I don't think we mentioned this during our remarks, but we have newsletters that we send out to farm worker serving organizations and the broader community that we work with, which is a great way to engage because you can sort of see what's going on and what campaigns are going on in the moment. And based on your expertise and your interests, really weigh in with those. Of course, with congressional advocacy, anytime that constituents can reach out to their local Congress people or senators, that's always very impactful as well. So those are just some of the ways that we'd love to have folks' collaboration.
Thank you, Edis. And this question for Alexis. What is the single biggest obstacle to addressing the health inequalities farm workers in the farm workers community? That's a great question. I'd like to know.
Oh gosh. So I would say likely the single biggest obstacle is immigration status. Since more than half of farm workers are undocumented and many live in mixed status families for those who may have some kind of documentation, these different immigration policies, especially over the last 4 years, have really impacted and been detrimental to the healthcare of farm workers. They're not able to access the needed services, Medicaid, SNAP. They're fearful about accessing any resources that they may be eligible for regardless of their documentation status, including community health centers, because of misinformation, fear about deportation. So immigration status, I think, is the biggest obstacle. And hopefully, if there is an immigration package and we are able to move forward on the Citizenship Act, then farm workers will be able to gain documentation status, and they will no longer be fearful to access the resources, and they also will be entitled to different benefits, including Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act health insurance marketplaces.
I have a question of my own, if you don't mind, because I know we've been talking about immigration status, and Bruce, you touched upon it too. Given the political ambiance right now in Washington, even though Democrats do have the White House and both houses of Congress, what are the possibilities of having an immigration reform bill passed during these first or the next year or the next 2 years? They do need in the Senate at least 10 Republicans to agree and all of Democrats to agree. I know that there's been many efforts. President George W. Bush attempted, President Obama attempted to do it, and they were not able to do it. So what chances do you think, or what would be different now that would help it go forward?
It's impossible to predict outcomes when it comes to immigration. The truth is we've been working for 30 years trying to fix the immigration system that's so broken, harms so many farm workers. But I actually am very optimistic that this year we could pass progressive immigration reform. And the reasons include, first of all, that the obstacle of Mitch McConnell being Senate Majority Leader is gone. So despite the need for 10 Republican votes or more, really, in the Senate, the agenda is determined by Chuck Schumer, who won't be an obstacle to progressive immigration reform. And there's still a lot of support in the House for immigration reform. Also, the polls show that the majority, significant majority of the public wants immigration reform that would allow undocumented immigrants to get access to immigration status. The public is in favor of this. And the third big factor I'll mention is business. Business needs workers. A lot of them are undocumented. They know that the immigration system's broken. They want it fixed. And money talks in this country. And some of them are putting money where their mouth is.
Thank you very much, Bruce. Thank you, Alexis. Thank you, Edie. As I mentioned before, Farmworker Justice is celebrating its 40th anniversary as an organization committed to advancing the living and working conditions of farm workers. When they began envisioning this impactful organization in 1980, way back then, they did so inside a cramped office in our nation's capital. They selected the name Farmworker Justice Fund with the goal of improving the lives of some of the hardest working, lowest paid, and most exploited people in the country. The celebration of their 25th anniversary saw their name changed to Farmworker Justice, and with that, a resolution to take advantage of the knowledge that was gained over the past quarter century and pursue an ambitious agenda. In the past 15 years, this incredible group has accomplished many of the goals they set out way back in 2006, but they will be the first to admit that there is much more that needs to be accomplished. And with a new presidential administration and a new Congress, as we just heard, there are new opportunities to help farm workers achieve a great measure of justice. I, for one, hope that everyone in whatever way they can will help Farmworker Justice fulfill that mission. I want to thank you all for being here, and I want to thank Farmworker Justice for inviting me to be part of this event. And I would like to invite David Damian Figueroa to share some closing remarks. David Damian. Unmute. I think you're muted still.
Unmute.
There you go.
Having a bit of technical issue there. Wanted to thank you so much for joining us, Maria Elena, for your participation, for the work that you do in the Latino community with Latino organizations across the country, and for the work that you do for Farmworker Justice. We truly, truly appreciate it. Without a doubt, you are the Hispanic voice of America and are highly respected and admired by millions, including yours truly here. And I'm so grateful for all the years I've had the opportunity to work with you. On behalf of the Farmworker Justice Board of Directors, our advisory council, and by the way, Ellen Gavin from the advisory council is one of the volunteers that help us connect us to the mass sewing squad, the Aunties group, that helped us coordinate tens of thousands of masks across America to farm worker organizations and agricultural communities. So volunteers are very much a part of the work that we do. On behalf of our board chair, Natalie Camacho Mendoza, our president and our leader, Bruce Goldstein, who's been with the organization for well over 3 decades, and grateful for his expertise and partnership with our staff, for the participation of our community partners, Sin Fronteras of Yuma, Arizona, and Líderes Campesinas of California, and our expert colleagues, my esteemed colleagues, Alexis, Gild, and Edith Figueroa, and of course, the entire Farmworker Justice staff, those that you don't see on the screen, that are behind the scenes, that are doing such amazing work as well. Just great group of folks that we have the opportunity to work with. We are grateful to the entire Veritas group who helped us put on this amazing broadcast. the Zoom broadcast. And I wanted to let you all know that there are questions that did not get answered today in the broadcast, but we will definitely follow up and answer those questions to you directly. So I noticed that there was a question from Stephen Hernandez, who is the mayor of Coachella. Thank you very much for your question, and Jesus as well. And we will address those right after the broadcast. And you can always contact anybody here at Farmworker Justice at www.farmworkerjustice.org, and there's a contact there, and all messages and emails will get to us directly. Farmworker Justice is not charged for its services, and consequently, we must raise the funds to serve farm workers for our social impact work with our community partners and the legal impact work that we do. Farmworker Justice is entering, as Marielena mentioned, its 40th year of service. It relies on the generosity of individuals like many of you watching today, private foundations and corporations to support our mission. We hope we can count on you to support as we enter into another challenging year with COVID-19. It's been an incredible year for many nonprofits like ours, and we are very grateful for anything that you can do to support us. On a personal note, I come from a family of farm workers. As a child, I grew up working in the fields of Arizona and in the citrus in Yuma, Arizona, and I'm very proud to be a part of a stellar team like Farmworker Justice, and to be a part of an important cause and to be able to be doing this type of work. I really hope that you can support our continued efforts, and we thank you so much for joining us today. And si se puede, and one day we hope to say si se pudo. Thank you for joining us.